Today we're going to talk about a way to retire early. And I mean, this comes from a conversation that I was having with a client. It's probably not so surprising, but that being said, I think it's worth putting some effort into. And so, as you might expect, I deal with people all over the world. I think we've had clients from 62 countries, something like that. Maybe it's a little bit more now. I have stopped keeping track, but at least 62 countries. And these people take all shapes and sizes, right? Many different careers, many different industries that they're in, many different ages. However, there are quite a few people who we talk to who are in a particular profile that I would say are kind of like around the 50 years old mark, right? Maybe slightly higher, maybe slightly lower, etc. But often sitting there and saying, hey, I've lived this life, had some good experiences, had some bad experiences, etc. But I'm at the stage where I need to be thinking about my future and retirement, and I'm, at kind of my peak earning years. I need to be stocking away some money so that I'm okay in 10, 15 years, whatever it is. And so today we're going to talk to those people about what it is that can be done, and we will find out whether those are any things that are applicable to you. So let's dive in. Again, before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. Thank you for being here with us. I really appreciate your support. If you are new here, please welcome. I'm Michael from Offshore Citizen. We're some of the foremost international tax experts. We specialize in being experts in multiple jurisdictions across multiple different dimensions of what's going on for you, which very, very few people are able to help with. And we help you with relocating abroad, with setting up companies abroad, with doing business in multiple countries, doing banking in multiple countries, getting residency permits and citizenships. We help you on both the strategy side and the implementation side. So if any of those things are interesting to you, please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendar.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or send a message through offshorecitizen.net. So this client's comment to me was, the government has taken more value out of my company than I have. And I think that's, an unfortunately reality for a lot of people, right? Your work has produced more for the government than it has for you. How fair does that seem? I don't know. It's very questionable. But it is unfortunately the reality for many different countries. I was talking to a friend and client who lives in Sweden earlier today, and he was just talking about the insane levels of tax that he pays over and above a certain threshold. And he's like, this is just madness, I forget what he said, 68% or something, like really, really tough. I talked to some people recently who are in Netherlands, and we're talking about, what they actually keep of what they earn is just outrageously low, right? Less than 20%. And so, you can just go, whoa, this is nuts. How am I possibly going to get ahead in that environment? And certainly certain parts of the world seem to be much more against people getting ahead than others. One of the things I've noticed, kind of contrasting, say, the US and Europe, is at least the US has kind of this idea of the American dream, where you're like, okay, we want people to have this, lack of a ceiling, so to speak. And some parts of the world, you get kind of a tall poppy syndrome in places like Australia. A lot of Europe sort of has this idea like it's bad to exceed this certain threshold. I sort of think that it goes back to sort of old monarchy stuff, where they have almost like this caste mentality of like, okay, you've got royalty and the commoners shouldn't get out of their place. Like, it kind of feels a little bit like that, which I find actually kind of disturbing in the modern day and age, but they don't label it as such. They tend to think, this is all wonderful in their value set. And I think it's easy to relate to that if you're in that situation. But, as you start to earn more and you start to see how little you're keeping of what you're earning, the fairness of that system becomes a little bit questionable. And frankly, the practicality of it in a world where Social Security and retirement plans, et cetera, are at a point where they may be bankrupt, they may not pay out for you. And honestly, the returns that you're getting are not that good. So in other words, if you just take the money and put it into, let's say you buy the S&P 500 every year for the entire time that you are kind of like working career, et cetera, the amount of money you will have is probably going to vastly exceed the amount of money that they end up giving you as a pension. So what was the point, right? So in that sense, I think very, very important to be mindful of what you can do to optimize. And the good news for a lot of people today is they have the ability to relocate. And what are the advantages of relocating? Well, two main things. One, your cost of living could potentially be quite a bit lower. Actually, your business costs could also be quite a bit lower, which means your profit margins could go up and you could keep more of what you're making. But also your taxes can go down dramatically. And so I'm sitting here in UAE. I mean, there's a new 9% corporate tax. Okay, less desirable than 0% for sure. Most people can probably get away with 0 just because of kind of some of the minimum thresholds and the way things work, but 0% personal and no tax on capital gains, et cetera. So you can kind of compound your investment income in that regard. Granted, there are some trade-offs. It's not the cheapest place in the world. There are other things to consider, like, for example, you don't have healthcare provided, et cetera. So whether UAE is the right place is a totally different question. But the bottom line is there are places you can go where you can gain a massive amount of arbitrage between your life today and your life in that situation. And this is really, really significant for people, because if you don't have money, what's going on in your life? Like, you can say, okay, listen, you know what? I don't want money to do everything. Look, I'm the first person to say lifestyle matters, values matter. You have to enjoy your life. Don't, say, hey, I'm going to hate my life so that I can go and make money. That's a terrible way to live. But the absence of money, not having enough, has a meaningful decrease in your quality of life, the life of your family, the opportunities you can have, all these other ripple effects. And so one of the best ways that people can take advantage of something different is to look at, are there global opportunities? And so where might those be? Well, you can go to Southeast Asia. Usually you can reduce costs there. You can go to Eastern Europe. Usually you can reduce costs there. You can go to Latin America. Usually you can reduce costs there. In theory, you could go to someplace like Africa, although a lot less people tend to want to go to Africa. But those 3 areas tend to be places where just the cost of living you can find, and again, it varies from country to country, but the cost of living can be quite a bit lower. Now, in addition to that, it turns out usually your tax burden is dramatically lower than places like, Europe is probably the worst, right? If you just kind of look at taxes plus socials plus all the other bureaucracy, et cetera, it's outrageously difficult to see how that equation stacks up in any really attractive manner. Kind of Western Europe, Southern Europe, et cetera. So for people who are looking for an alternative, I would say these are probably kind of your first 3 areas. Let's just kind of go through some examples of specific countries and talk about them. So Bulgaria, lowest cost of living in the EU, also happens to have 10% flat tax rate. Okay, there's some other ways you can maybe optimize beyond that, but 10% flat tax rate beats basically everywhere else in Europe, and your cost of living is lower. So, pretty good. Romania also has a flat tax of 10% on individuals. Again, very comparable cost of living to Bulgaria, so good opportunities in that regard. If you wanted to, you could go to Bosnia, similar sort of thing. You could go to Albania if you wanted to, similar sort of thing. Macedonia, similar sort of thing. Whether you want to go to any of those countries, that's totally up to you. Georgia would be another one. Georgia, the cost of living since the Russians have all come in has gone up a reasonable amount, but still, what you get for the money and your tax side of things, et cetera, can be fairly attractive. If we look at Southeast Asia, so you could go to Malaysia, you could go to Thailand, you could go to potentially Philippines, potentially for certain cases, Vietnam. So these are like 4 that would be fairly attractive for certain types of people, and frankly can offer, in a lot of cases, you can get a better quality of life in Southeast Asia than you can in your Western country anyway. Things like healthcare can be better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't necessarily have to have a negative trade-off in that regard. Then we've got places in Latin America, a little bit more questionable in terms of where you would go in this regard, but certainly some people really like Colombia. Ecuador is becoming more popular. There's places like Uruguay, Paraguay. Generally, I don't find that those are that popular, at least with the people that I'm dealing with, but certainly they can be very attractive. There are some optimizations you can get in for a period of time in places like Chile, Argentina. Then there are places like Nicaragua. You might say places like Costa Rica. Costa Rica is fairly expensive, but tax-wise you can benefit. Similar thing with Panama. Cost of living typically is lower in Mexico, so a lot of people really love Mexico. Any of these parts of the world can offer you something that you can often find a fit for you. Now, you might say, well, hang on a minute. I don't really like those places. I like such and such culture. Okay, fair enough. Well, are there places that are sort of a middle ground for you? So for example, a very popular place in the world today is Portugal. Portugal, because of the NHR, it is possible for many people, not all people, lots of different types of income do not work out for this, but for certain types of income, you can optimize and improve your tax situation versus where you're coming from. Again, depends on where you're coming from. And the cost of living is quite reasonable, and people love that it's European quality of life, the weather is great, you kind of get that more European culture, etc. So that could be a good place to look. Some other people may consider some place like Malta or Cyprus. I would say that Cyprus, people who go to Cyprus tend to stay there quite a bit, but I would say fewer people move there. You could do something sort of similar in Turkey. The taxes are not as good in Turkey as they are in Cyprus. And I would say that generally people don't seem to prefer it as much, but again, to each their own. And, there's a lot of variety. Even if you want to say, okay, imagine you're coming from Scandinavia. You're like, okay, well, I'm from Finland. Okay, well, you're probably going to do better just by going to Estonia, And is Estonia the right fit for you? Who knows? But I think it's at least worth exploring, at least worth checking out some of these alternatives and seeing. Maybe you say, well, it's a little bit too gritty in places like Bulgaria, Romania, Bosnia, etc. for me. Okay, well, Hungary, 15% tax rate. Not so terrible. Cost of living tends to be a little bit lower. Again, pretty nice place in some places like Budapest, etc. Again, no places for everybody, so you can kind of see. But give some thought to, are there some places that you might like to go and spend the next 10 years, really important years of your life, kind of saving, not having the government take more from you from your business than you do. I mean, if they're taking, in Hungary, it's a 9% corporate tax, right? Okay, this is pretty reasonable. Most people are fairly okay with that. Much better than being in some country where you're going to get taxed 30% corporate plus whatever amount in personal plus, right? Let me know what you guys think are some of the greatest places. Put them in the comments below. Would love to hear from you. Where you think for people in your circumstance are great, what circumstance that is. And I will enjoy reading the comments, and hopefully it will be useful to some other people. And we will see you guys on the next video.